Okay, everyone, I have a special guest here with me today, someone I've worked alongside with before, and I know pretty well, but I get to know him a little bit better today. So, Damon McLean, I really appreciate you being here on the show, man. And I know this is probably long overdue. I probably should have hit you up earlier on. But Damon is also a fellow sales development leader, so we definitely share that passion. But he has a really interesting background that I want to unpack with the audience first. So you're not originally from the States. Where are you from originally? And talk to us about that journey coming to the United States.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Derek. This means a lot to me. And I know I said we've worked together in the past. And so for me, this is like working together again, but some of the stuff that you're doing in the industry, I love to see it.
Cool. Thanks,
Um,
man.
yeah, my background is interesting. I like to say I am from Jamaica, born and raised. If people know Montego Bay in Kingston, so I was born and raised right out of Montego Bay. I ended up going to
Nice.
high school in Kingston. That was fun. And if everyone knows like the boys and girls champs, it's probably the heights of like track and field for high school in Jamaica. Um,
Uh,
and so I was able to, like wow some of the coaches because you do have college coaches coming to take a look. And throughout my career, like early career, I'm a high school kid. I get a letter from this wonky school in Jersey called Princeton, and you're like, "Hey, we're interested for you to come to a camp." I'm like, funny, someone's messing with me, right? Uh,
this is
and
spam.
so, yeah, this was kind of, it would be kind of the equivalent of junior year. And so I was like,
Okay.
oh, but I can't go to a camp in the summer. I can't afford that. Um, but it started to make me realize that I could go to America. I could go to school abroad, um,
Mm.
that I didn't necessarily have to just go to school in Jamaica.
So that wasn't necessarily a plan early on in your life to make the parlay into the States. Like this just happened serendipitously.
Yeah.
Hmm.
As I think about my family, I'm probably one of the only one that's in America right now. It just hasn't been done. Or people, I did have people from my college, from my high school who actually came to America. So I would have seen instances of,
Okay.
okay,
Hmm.
these people are going there. And so it was sort of a possibility, but it wasn't full on. And so, as you can imagine, college is not cheap, and our exchange rate in Jamaica isn't the best. And so, I started thinking, hey, if I'm going to do this, it has to be for free. And I didn't necessarily care where I ended up. I just said, hey, if I'm going to do this, I just has to be for free, and it give me the opportunity to expand the lines. And so
Hmm.
said, so done. I had a couple college coming knocking because it turns out I was actually good at what I was doing.
So you were a track and field, high school, got identified junior year or our equivalent of a junior year. Now, I know you to do the triple jump for the
Mhm.
track and field games. Was it always triple jump? Did you do high jump? Did you do relays? Anything else?
I was mainly long jump actually. So a lot of people see me in triple. I think a lot of people actually starts in the long jump and then triple is kind of like, oh, you're not doing that great. Go do the triple.
Okay.
I don't think it's something some people take up. And so that's what is happening where it's like I've been going down this path of a long jumping and I realized, hey, I'm not doing as great as I thought. And my coach was like, hey, maybe you're more suited for this. And so it was like a slight transition.
Okay.
And turns out I was really good at it. And it's part of the I also say there's not a lot of people doing it, but it's one of those things that's a great combination of speed and strength that like can really, when done well, it looks great. So
Right. Right.
that's a big ping for me. And then I think towards the end of that year, everyone knows the Penn relays. I had the opportunity to go to the Penn relays. So that really kind of blew it up. I came second at the Penn relays that
Oh,
year,
wow. Nice.
in high school. And so that was just, okay, now I'm here. It was also my first time in America.
A little
um,
overwhelming, probably.
yeah, and but it was such a great opportunity because the Jamaican crowd, and from then obviously more coaches came calling to say, hey, like this dude coming from a small country, what could he do for our college?
Nice, nice. Well, I know that the Olympics were a target of yours, particularly the 2016 Olympics. So we'll talk about you training and getting ready for that. But before we do, I want to understand, like early on at this point in your life, what did your parents do, and how did they influence your decisions early on in terms of getting into track and field, coming to the States and through a full ride, all this kind of stuff? Like, how did they influence that?
Yeah, so this is an interesting story that very few people know. So my mom was just she works in a restaurant. My dad, he's a coach. We don't really talk. So he does coach, like, high school soccer, track and field, cricket.
Okay.
Um, the big thing for me though was it was a thing that was mine. Track and sports became a thing that was mine. The other thing that you haven't heard, Derek, is that I was also a goalkeeper. I played soccer as well, right up towards. In
Okay.
fact, I got the opportunity to represent Jamaica. I turned it down
Wow.
for the under-19 because at that point I just got my track scholarship and I didn't want to jeopardize,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was actually, sports was my thing, and I like to say I was a nerd, right? I had 4.0 GPA, and so I felt like me
Wow.
doing the 4.0 GPA was for my family, but I needed something that was mine.
Right.
And then sports became my thing, where I was the one it was my solace. Like, no one told me what to do. I did it out of a love, not necessarily because my parents wanted to it. And I'm sure there's tons to unpack there of like the things we do because we try to please our parents.
Right.
But
Exactly.
sports became my thing, where it was my solace away from trying to please other people in my life.
Got it. And you studied chemistry though when you were there too, so that's an interesting choice.
Yeah, it's and just like with most college, I come to America. It was freezing cold. I'm in Jersey. I've
Right. You're
never
coming from
been.
Jamaica to that.
Yeah, right. It's then when I actually came, it was my second time in America. So I'm like, okay, what is happening here? You get to choose a major after your second year, and it was one of those things where chemistry was I was just good at it. I was just like, hey, like everyone was all the pre-med people were doing the pre-med courses. I did all that. I felt like I was really good at it. Which was, looking back in hindsight, you have always think about the things that you're really good at, but the thing that you might use to make a living. It's so funny. I'm in sales and I had a chemistry background.
Right.
For me, it's I love being in the lab. I love being in the lab. I'm running experiments. What I didn't love was the fact that a lot of the graduate students that I saw, they were just there. That was their life. And I felt like I was more of a social person. And so for me, I ended up doing chemistry because, yeah, I did love it, but it was also a part of it too. Is like, I just needed to fulfill my duty. I needed to get this degree and then say, hey, my parents, here's this 4-year degree that you guys want me to have. Now can I go live my life? So it was interesting transition. Chemistry was fun, but I didn't also think through what might I do with it after the fact. So you're starting to see a theme of just showing up, working hard, but
Yeah.
like not necessarily thinking what the end result might be.
Well, there doesn't always have to be a master plan in play. We can have what works right now and where our interests lie today, and know that sometimes our passions evolve later and they're found through the mission. So it's an interesting story. And I can only imagine what that was like, just navigating, coming to the States and, studying chemistry, which is in itself is a very robust topic, getting a 4.0, doing well in track and field and soccer. I mean, you're all over the place. So talk about that transfers into you getting ready for the Olympics, right? There's a level of discipline. There's an order and routine in your life. There's something you're doing on a regular basis that's helping you be successful in all these fields. So, talk about what you do in preparation, because the parallel that I want to draw in is that salesperson who should be preparing for the Olympics of their career effectively, right? So when you think about getting ready for the 2016 Olympics, what did that time in your life look like? You were a completely different person then.
Yeah, completely different person. I would have been 2 years out of graduation, and you talked about some games that I'd been at. And I graduated 2014 coming out of college. And so I was in an interesting place because I'm from Jamaica, I don't have a green card, I'm not a citizen. And so the whole idea is like, how do I stay in the country? And so there is this stress. I go back home and it's like, hey, do I go do this PhD because I have a bachelor's in chemistry? Do I go back to do more school? And I'm like, I don't know. I think I'm a very self-driven person. I can figure this out. But I was on the cusp of, I wasn't the top. I was, all American multiple times over in college, but I wasn't like top three, and so for me, it's like I feel like I have it within me, because when I look at cohorts of people that I joined, entering college with, like they were top three. I was like, why did they get so far? And so for me, it's maybe it was the coaching, maybe it was the environment. And so I felt like I have the drive, but I didn't have the environment to make me successful. So
Got it.
that summer worked hard, got to go to the Commonwealth Games. That was in Scotland, so that was amazing.
Wow.
And then after the Commonwealth Games, well, actually during, I got the opportunity to meet up with, Usain Bolt was there.
Wow.
A couple other really
Nice.
good athletes were just
Yeah.
there. And I was like, wow, I could see myself doing this.
Yeah.
If anyone knows anything about professional sports or even professional track, you don't get paid a lot. Or it's just, when you're starting out, it's professional track. It's not like college track where you have a team. You have to go find a team. And so the first thing I wanted to say is like, where would I go train? And so for me, it was, we had a really great opportunity to go to this group that was in Phoenix, Arizona. And it really fundamentally changed the way I thought about showing up daily and preparation. And if you start to think about it, I always often think about in work, we're showing up every day. It's like every day is game day.
Right.
But for an Olympic, like most people are training 4 years, right, to show up to this Olympics. Even
for
to
that,
get
for that week
one,
or whatever it is.
right.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
most professionals, and it's not just sports, but like if you think about anyone who's owning their craft, whether it's a 10,000-hour rule or whatever you think about it, whether it's a musician, the performance is probably only 5% of anything that they're doing, but they're training for the 95%. And
Wow.
so for me, I'm thinking about, okay, at that point, it was 2014. I have 2 years to go hit this mark. What's my investment? How can I fundamentally shift my mindset? And so being in this environment started to make me start to think about, and I'll go into a little bit about like what my days would look like, but it's like you have to go all in. And so there are some people that are able to work part-time and then do it. But it's like, if this is a goal of mine, I'm 21, it's like, I have nothing to lose. And then my biggest thing is I didn't want to wake up at 35 and said that could have been me. Like I wanted to give
it my all.
Exactly. So for me, as I'm sitting down, it's like I'm getting to be around these amazing athletes. I'm starting to see like there's a next level to this. It's like you have to eat, sleep, and breathe, to the point where I'm going to the grocery store and the thing that's in my head is I don't want to be on my feet for too long, right? So I'm mapping out my route. Like the cool thing is like I was able to be around these people, so we'd live together, and it's like our fridge is clean, like everything is healthy. Like we're keeping each other accountable. We're working on our mindset. We're visualizing. Like we're taking rehab seriously. Ice bath, like all this fun stuff. Like we're getting our rehab. But throughout the day, when we start to think about what my day looks like, you get up in the morning with, my coach used to say, hey, you need minimum 60 hours of sleep per week. And I was like, I'm trying to do the math because I'm
doing that in my head right now. That's a lot of naps.
That's a lot of rest, right? But when you think about LeBron and those guys, they're getting those 8 to 10 hours of sleep minimum per week. And so
because that's where the recovery happens and so forth.
Exactly. So I just came out of high-powered, like Ivy League college where I was sleeping 4 to 6 hours a week. And I was like,
if you were lucky. Oh, you said a week.
Yeah. Nah, sorry, a day. And I'm like, coach, 60 hours a week minimum. I'm like, my body is just not used to that. So you start to think about the fundamental shifts we had to make. We're waking up, we're eating our breakfast. I'm getting in the track somewhere 8:39, maybe a 2-3 hour session. You take a 30-minute break, then you're in the gym for another 2 hours. Like I'm leaving the day 2:33, then it's recover for the rest of the day to come and do that again the next day.
Right.
And you think you're doing that 6 days a week, like my entire focus is how do I show up and have the best day ever?
Like you said, you're living, breathing, and eating this.
Yeah. And then it's like all of this is geared towards, right? Because, with everything, there's a preseason. So you're like, hey, you start maybe end of August to, and you're not competing till probably December first meet. You have a couple of meets December, January, you take a break, you hit back the training sessions, then you go maybe it's spring break. And then it's time for the summer. So you're really just tuning that engine to let loose. And it's like this mindset of high performance that it's so funny that when I come and I transition, and we'll talk about the transition to tech, when companies say we're a high performing team, I'm like, But
Really, are you though?
you know,
Yeah.
and I was like,
Like,
there's
no,
two
this is
different
what
things
this
here.
goes to why we hire athletes in sales, because of this rigor that they're accustomed to. And the assumption I think that a lot of revenue leaders have is that it's going to automatically translate in our environment, when the reality is you had a lot of good coaches around you. You had a lot of people who were not, your mentors, coaches, peers that were very like-minded. So you had that component that a revenue leader has to try and recreate internally, right? Sales ops, peer group, marketing, demand gen. We all kind of have to be rowing in the same direction. And this is the environmental conditions, right? Like just being able to be secluded, if you will, to visualize and manifest these things. And the environmental conditions, we own that as revenue leaders. Like we literally own that. If we do anything, like the talent that an individual has and what they do from a preparation standpoint, a lot of that does fall on the individual. But what we do own is the environmental conditions and the structures that can be put in place to facilitate and foster these things. But that's when I hear this, I don't know about everybody else who's listening and watching, but that's where my mind is at. Every point you're making, I'm making a parallel to a salesperson, a sales leader, or in that environment of like that level of intensity. That it really, for me, that's what it took. I mean, I didn't go to a fancy college, coming up. I started my career early and I just worked my ass off and I went all in, and I didn't watch sports like my friends were doing. I wasn't going out to the clubs. I wasn't doing a lot of the things that, my peers would have been doing at my age. A, I had a kid at home, but B, I also had this career that was bubbling and I wanted to make the most of it. So, going all in is, it sounds cliche, but you're really painting a vivid picture of what that looks like.
Yeah. And I'll add to that where you talk about going all in and like the sacrifices, right? So imagine there's a young group of highly fit people in Phoenix, Arizona. We're right beside ASU, one of the biggest colleges in the nation. We're
one of the biggest party colleges in the nation. A lot of temptation run around, I'm sure.
And so it's like the focus had to be there, right? And there is this, we talk about creating that environment where, so we had multiple coaches, right? It's multiple, like I would remember I'm just doing one sprint, and on an even given day, I would have maybe 4 to 6 eyes on me, just observing. And in, not only do I have 3 coaches watching over me, talking about like how to make me successful, I have my therapist that's right there ready. Like, hey, if I'm feeling a tight in my back knot, he'll give me like a massage. I have another person who's like an actual doctor. Someone there's the acupuncture. It's like, then you have.
Are you serious? An acupuncture therapist?
Yeah, man. It's like an entire ecosystem, right, of showing up and saying, we're here. And then we also had a sports psychologist. A couple of times a week, he'll just come out and watch. Like, he's not just doing sessions with us in his office. He's like, I want to come out and see, like, what are the limiting factors? Like, how do you show up in practice? And so there's an entire ecosystem of when you show up, like, no one is telling you, hey, be motivated. It's interesting. We're talking about, like, I've done this. Is like when I start to think about coaching my reps, is it skill, is it will? Like, that wasn't an issue when I'm training for the Olympics, because everyone who shows up and said, I'm in this, like, motivation is not an issue. Like, obviously you want this, like, because you're here. And the system is set up that if you're not into, there's never been, we say we have this term, we put people on pips and we coach them out. Like, no one leaves the training group because everyone's there and is 100% motivated. No one ever doubts your motivation.
But you can always say that in business, though.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's the point. Is unfortunately, the reality is that you don't have people who are tapped into their passion the way you were in business, right? I mean, it's a job, it's a paycheck, and I'm gonna do as little as possible to collect that check. And like, right or wrong, sometimes we are a little too generous in our pay structures, and it creates this lackadaisical approach because, hey, I live with mom and dad, my salary is X and I'm pretty good there, so I'm not really motivated if money is my motivation, if you will. But yeah, I think that's, so how do you take that, because that's going to be frustrating for you, is like, working with SDRs, working with salespeople, even account executives that you're, helping your SDRs with, because they're right. Similar dynamic happens there. Coming from this level of discipline and focus that you have, and you have it articulated really well in your mind, and with a chemistry major, you know how to, I'm sure, pragmatically deploy these things and run experiments with your team and all that. But how do you deal with the mindset of someone who is not giving it their all, who's not all in? How do you help them get all in, or, level it up a little bit? I mean, what does that look like? Because not everybody is driven and passionate around you like you are.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. And I've thought long and hard about this type of stuff, because each person comes with a different level of motivation, right? I do think the difference is, for me, like, if everyone's training for the Olympics, we know what the end goal is, and it's also very measurable, right? Now, when we come to the work world or startups, each person show up with a different motivation and they have a different end goal, right? Like, you might say, hey, I have kids to feed at home, where I might say, every year
I
I'm
just
trying
got
to
engaged.
yeah,
Yeah. For those that are listening and
or
watching, Damon just got engaged in January. So congratulations. But yes, different motivations.
yeah, it's like different motivation. Or I just had a kid at home. I just need,
Right.
like, I only have 4 hours of sustained growth. Or it's like, I just graduated and I'm trying to travel as much as, in my flexible PTO that I get.
There you go.
And so there's a part of it where you try to tap into each person's intrinsic motivation. But I think one of the things that, and I've recently learned this, is you can't get people more motivated or less motivated. What I've said is, going back to what you're saying, like we hinted on it, is like, how can I create an environment where this person shows up and bring their best selves,
Right.
and do their great work? So we had talked about this a little bit, but it's called, like, the minimum viable dosage of, if I'm setting up benchmarks, or if I'm working towards something, can I create a process that's inclusive of, hey, here's a mom that she can only give me 3 to 4 hours a day, and she's okay going on with the rest of the day with her son. Or this person can't give me, like, he can work 60 hours. Can I create a process that's inclusive of all of that, but then still contributes to my goal? And so that's where the thing is. It's, hey, everyone has an end goal, right? Someone may want to travel, and so how can I? It's a means to an end. Like, the job is never an end unto itself. So how can I ensure that the job and what's a requirement for me, and to how I'm going to hit my pipeline goals, serves their end goal? And one person might just love cold calling and just like, hey, I'm just here to make as much money as possible. Make sure there's
Good
there's
leads. Make sure there's phone numbers and
yeah,
go.
and the other person might be like, I just really like to connect with the person. So they're like, I don't mind being on the phone for 15 minutes, or I don't mind taking time to craft this wonderful email. And so can I design a process and create an environment where everyone is celebrating in their unique way, where there's the minimum, right? Like, we want to make sure that people are, because there's still stuff that I still need to be able to predict my pipeline and how it's
book meetings. I need to create new opportunities, and they need to progress. I mean, yeah.
So that's the mindset that I've taken. And then it's like, hey, it's one of my philosophy is, I should be having monthly, weekly conversations outside my one-on-ones, where it's like, is this the best thing for you? And there's an honesty. No one likes to lose a job, but I'd much rather, it should never be a surprise if after a couple quarters, like, hey, this is just not where your head's at, And then it goes back to, is it just something you don't have the skill, or it's like, I'm just not that interested in selling a new widget, right? Let's be honest. And that's okay too. And so
it goes back to, this is just a job, and I needed a job, and not everybody is super passionate about SDR work, for instance. It's a means to an end, because a lot of them are trying to parlay it up to the next step for themselves as well. But you're not going to get to that Olympic Games if you don't master the regionals, right? So same sort of thing.
And I've had to learn, and I'm sure you've seen this too, Derek, where it's like, not everybody wants to be at the top of the leaderboard, which sounded crazy to me at first. And I was like, how could you not want to, win and like be at the top? But it's like, hey, if they're hitting 90 to 100% of the quota, and they're just like, I'm just okay hitting my good numbers, like, I don't need to go above and beyond.
Right.
And I've had to be okay with that. a lot of the teams that I work with, I've come in and I've taken over. So sometimes I haven't hired them. And so for me, it's trying to figure out what kind of environment can I build that people are going to show up with different levels of motivation. And it's kind of like building your recipe. It's like, can you use what you have to make this amazing, cake at the end of the day? Versus
so the one-on-ones, you have an additional one-on-one, if you will, like you're meeting with them outside of your recurring one-on-one with the team members. You have another meeting that you do with them individually that's different. Like, how are you doing? Is a check-in? So that's part of how you operationalize this environment creating approach where it's dynamic enough for each person's intrinsic motivations.
Yeah, yeah. And that started a couple years ago. It was like really cool. Part of me, I was just being selfish. There was this like really froyo ice cream place that was near our office down.
Okay, yeah.
And I was like, hey, you want to go for this walk and talk? And like, as I was walking out, get my froyo.
And I'll expense it out and it's all good.
Yeah. And it became like this thing where people really enjoy just like, because there was something about, and there's this psychology behind it of being shoulder to shoulder, of having this conversation where I'm just walking along.
A lot of executives do this. They go for walks. They have walking one-on-ones. Yeah.
And now obviously a lot of the stuff is remote. So it's like, hey, I'll just, instead of the Zoom, I'll just call your cell. I'll go for a walk. You go for a walk too. In your neighborhood.
Brilliant.
Yeah, and so it's kind of a decompress, and it's the one thing we've realized is, and sometimes the training, you kind of have to take people out of the environment that they're in for them to stop and like reflect. Reflection is a big thing, and if you don't, that's probably one of the main ways that adults learn, through reflection. And so if you don't create space for reflection, they'll never reflect on like, is this what I want? And also make sure they feel comfortable, because that's the hardest thing of like psychological safety. Do they feel comfortable saying, actually, this isn't it, but I like getting paid. How can we work this out? Because that's what it comes to.
Do you get vulnerable, and how do you create psychological safety?
So yes, vulnerability, you can't go, right? If you read anything by Brené Brown, like that's where it's rooted in. It's deep-rooted vulnerability. There are times when I'm in between a rock and a hard place, because if you ask me, like, who do I serve? I have my CEO, generally I have my head of sales.
It depends who's asking.
Yeah. And I have my reps. So I'm sitting in between a lot of places where at the end of the day, you have this term where it's like, we're trying to increase shareholder value, right? And so part of me is I'm trying to move the business forward, but I'm also trying to look up, because a lot of these people I would have hired, and I want to say, hey, like, I hired you, you put your trust in me, your career in me, I'm trying to do what's best for you, which might not be in this place, or it might be, but here's what I might need to see in order.
Or it might not be the thing that you want to hear or do, but that's the thing that needs to happen for you to reach that next level, whether you accept it or not, just based on, whatever track record and experience and pattern recognition you have.
Yeah. A lot of my vulnerability, I will always share what I'm thinking, but I try to invite them into my decision process.
Okay.
And so it's, hey, if you were me, I'm in this weird spot. You're 3 months into, in the year, you're only at 20% of your quota. Here's what I'm seeing. These numbers aren't matching up. I'm kind of in a tight spot here. Generally, we would put you on a PIP and do these things, but talk
to me. Yeah.
Like, and so and then I also say, hey, I'm not going to say who, but I am being asked, like, what is happening? Like, and I also tell them how I get paid too, because that's it's like, hey,
we're in this together. Your success is mine. If we can turn this around, let me know what I need to do. Right.
Yeah.
Like, let's get bought in.
Which is, I don't think a lot of people do that. I tell my reps how I get paid, and it's like, hey, generally I'm here for your development. So even though sometimes I might say, we want to slow down to speed up, I'm being affected too. Because I'm trying to, we've seen it, unfortunately. It's like, I've often said, we're trying to go long, right? Instead of we're trying to go, we're not here for a short time. Like, if we're truly trying to build a big business, which most people are, right, you're not going to be here for 6 months. You're not going to be here for 9 months.
Yeah, you can't continuously play the short game. There, at some point, you have to think long-term and strategically.
Yeah, and there are some things which you and I, and you've done it too, you've grown, and we've all grown. The growth didn't come in 1 week. it didn't come in 2 weeks. It didn't
And
come in
coming
3
one higher. Yeah.
yeah. Like some things I'm still working out how I even ask questions. All of us have, read the books and like, oh, how we should ask like powerful questions. And I still wrestle with it. I'm practicing. So these are the things that I'm trying to share them. Like I'm here to make sure you develop as a person. And this is the tug, because at the end of the day, it's what any sales leader has to deal with. How do we hit our goals today, but also think strategically 4 quarters down the road?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so,
And how do we, avoid attrition and get the most out of people for the lifetime value of these employees?
yeah,
Right? Like it's a constant bob and weave between long and short term. Yeah, and there is a big responsibility that falls on us as leaders, as I mentioned. Those environmental conditions and these kinds of things we definitely own. But there is that other side of the pendulum, right? Like how much of the development, how much of the change management does the individual own, right? The rep. I know I invest a lot of time outside of work to get better, to master my domain, these sorts of things. You spend money on books, courses, you take mentors out to lunch and dinner, right? There's a lot of things that we do individually to get better, but when you're working with a team, how much of an emphasis do you make on their ownership and the time they invest to get better?
yeah. So this is an interesting too, because it goes back to the minimum viable dosage. One of the things I always think about is, does the rep know what it takes to be successful? Do they know what good look like? And have I either modeled it, whether I'm jumping on calls, I'm sending emails, I'm doing a day in the life, or can I point out a top rep on my team and said, here's the behaviors that we want? So that's actually one of the most important things to me. And then the question then becomes, if they replicate the behavior that I would have shown them just by doing that, like, would they be successful, or do they have to go above and beyond? Now, this is different for every company, because if I'm at a smaller org and it's very messy, things aren't like, it's blurry, things aren't laid out, I need someone who is okay with a little bit of ambiguity.
Yep.
And then I might hire for a profile that is, we talk about deep curiosity and is always learning on themselves, like they're a self-starter. Now, as the org mature, I may not need as much of a self-starter. I just need someone who will come in and execute. I don't need you to figure it out. Obviously, I'm still going to give you autonomy and places to be creativity.
Your ability to follow instructions and not be a maverick becomes a real important asset now.
Yeah. So I think to that question you're asking is like, how much is on them? I think it depends on the stage of the company.
Okay.
There's always like, I always say, like, there's so much within me. And words I say is that, like, I want people to pull things out of me, right? And so I love when the reps like, hey, D, I have this idea. Like, we haven't been doing as much with our videos. Like, I have this new video script. Can I go test it out? I'm like, oh, cool. Like, let's add this to it. Or, hey, I just found this new tool. I've been testing it out for a week. I think it could help us in these areas. Like, what do you think? Or there's this new way of saying this. Like, hey, I've just been trying this new stuff. Like, I love when reps pull things out of me, because especially as we grow bigger, we have more reps, like it's hard for me to put in a personalized, like, here's how to get the best out of you. But I try my best to lay, do they know what it is to be successful? Do they have all the tools? And if they just did what I ask of them, like, would that be enough? More often than not, it isn't. But the reps that truly, because I always say I can only define this, the perfect process, like maybe 70% of the time, when everything's flowing. If you follow my process, like
you get 70% of the way there, but smart people will figure out the 30%.
Yeah. And that's, I share that with them. I said, honestly, I don't know if you follow my process if it's going to succeed. I know it's like 70%, you'll get there, but you may not be 100%. That 30%
directionally will get you going in the right direction.
Yeah. And I said that differed by stage. The more mature we get, now I'm able to say, hey, I have all this data that I know that, like, if you do this, you're going to
99%. Yeah, this is where you're going to end up. Here's the pattern. So that opens up a couple things. The KPIs, right? I think we all know the situation where a team will have these blanket KPI requirements, daily, key performance indicators, right? Number of calls, number of emails, and we manage to these minimums. And if they're not hitting these minimums, they get scrutinized. Now, when I think about some of the things you've talked about in tailoring the environment and making it more fluid to the individual, it's the concept of saying that, maybe Sally needs a certain mix of KPIs, where John needs a different mix of KPIs to get to that 80%, that 90%, or to get, all the way there, right? Do you apply sort of a different mathematical model to individual reps, or do you still sort of subscribe to, here's the minimum viable dosage in terms of like daily performance across the board for everybody?
I do not. I do more of well, it's still the minimum viable dosage, but I give them options, right? So, like an example, and this is actually very rudimentary. It's like, hey, you need to add 100 people, net new people per week into sequence. And so I'm already thinking, if I go to reps, they're like, why, right? And a lot of it's actually probably my chemistry background. A lot of the things that I roll out, I'm like, hey, I don't have enough data. Can we run this test for this quarter?
I love that. I was
And
hoping
then
you were going to bring this up. Yeah.
And then at the end of the quarter, we can revisit and then iterate, because we as salespeople don't want to talk about it. But it's like, okay, we're in May, and then June's coming up, and then summer. And it's like, most orgs never get matured at seasonality, like they truly understand seasonality. Like, it's just like, okay, we know that summer is wonky, maybe December. It's like,
Right.
but
Vacations.
Yeah. Like, why are we low this month? Oh, September was a low month. I don't know why. It's like, it's because it's not just on us. So I say, hey, here's me. I'm running a test. We need minimum 100, but what does that look like? Is it 100 calls? It is 100 emails if you follow the sequence. And so I would say, hey, it's and it's, so I guess I need to flip the caveat. Like, we all care about meetings and conversations. Right. Those are the things that I always push towards. And so there's always going to be a goal of, hey, can we get 10 conversations this week? Because we feel like the more conversation we have, not only you're learning for the org, but those conversations move into like meetings. Right. Now, how you get to the conversation is a little bit different.
Right.
Now, we've
for
seen
each individual, right?
Yeah. So I can say, here's just the numbers. It's an average. I'm seeing, this is your initial rough numbers, that in order to get to 15 conversations, you need to add 100 people per week. This is an average, people. So if you know that you're more high volume, you're going to go.
But we know we need the 15 conversations. That's a fact. So if you take an alternate route and you should come up short of the 15, we have not succeeded. Right. So like the autonomy, like you're mentioning, is there. But again, Sally might do really well over social with video, where Johnny might need to, pound the phones and do some follow-up emails or some mix there within, right? So that's the piece that I feel like is hard for revenue leaders to wrap their head around. But that's also what reinforces your role as a frontline manager, is to manage those components, because that sort of thing is really hard to, you really can't make it repeatable, right? Because you bring a different person into the team, it changes that dynamic, right? So you need a person managing that individual dynamic in order for that to mature. Otherwise, you fall back to everything is the same. We all have the same cookie cut approach. And that brings me to the other point that I wanted to make about what you were saying, is thwarting our development as a company. Because when we hire creative people, we hire well-meaning, capable people, a lot of times have a lot of passion and intellect and can figure things out. But then we force them into this playbook. We force them into this script, into these sequences, into this stuff. And particularly if you're early stage, it's really hard to justify because you don't have the history, right? And so you force these really bright people early in their stay with you, which is probably their most creative time, and you put them into this very structured, and this box, if you will. And if you're trying to focus on people who can follow instructions before you've gotten it repeatable, then you're not learning, because they would have done different experiments, right? They would have tried different approaches. They would have played with the KPIs, like we mentioned earlier, in different channels. But now you've thwarted your development as a company, because you're not learning from those creative approaches that they would have taken, and you're thwarting their engagement in your business, because now they feel like, okay, I'm in this box and I have to follow these instructions. Shit, I'm just going to sit here, shut up, and just collect my paycheck, right? So this environmental condition thing that we're talking about, I feel like is it goes back to why we need really sound leaders like yourself who've been around really good coaches and mentors, because we don't really get trained as frontline managers really well, right? We know the dynamic of hiring top players and promoting them in, but they never knew how to handle people. You, on the other hand, coming from your background, that's why I wanted to really establish that, is you were around a phenomenal set of coaches in one meet, in one practice. You mentioned 6 coaches, different ecosystems around you. So anyway, I'll stop soapboxing, but I think what I hear, this approach that you're talking about, this environment you're talking about creating, we have to have this fluid approach to it, and we got to remember that we don't want to limit our own selves as a business.
Yeah. There's a part of me, like Aaron Ross, the whole predictable revenue is one of the things that we miss. Is with everything, we're humans. Like we get sick, like we have headache, like
shit happens.
You know what I mean? And so I might build my model off like, hey, there's 20 working days, this month, but it's like when you do the math, you're like, if I have a team of 3 right now, I'm hiring, hint, but if one of my reps is sick this week, that's 30% of my team productivity gone down. And so we don't realize it's like the part of it. I get, like, when I talk to CEOs or chief revenue officers and they want the predictability, that's what they want. They want people who are robotic and like they know they can hit these numbers. And so it is arguably very much harder to manage and to lead the way that we're talking about right now, Derek, because it's so much easier to go manage towards a number versus manage toward the individual.
It's highly dependent on people like you to orchestrate it.
Yeah. And so the one thing that I've really changed the way I share reports and predictions and just like forecasting is like, hey, we will hit our number if we're able to execute these things. Like if we do these things, we'll hit our number. So my confidence, and I don't know if we've ever talked about it, but there's a difference between the process goals and the outcome goals, right? Like the outcome goals are just, like, hey, I'm trying to read 5 books this year. So that's an outcome goal. The process is I'm going to read 10 pages each day. And so if you show up each day, read your 10 page, you might actually read more than 5, because you might feel like, oh my God, like I'm just going through. You might end up reading more than 5 goals.
Well, this goes back to what you were saying earlier with the 85%. Like you're only like 5% of the time, 15% of the time, you're actually performing. You're on the field in the meet. Whereas the 85%, 90% of your time is spent preparing.
Yeah. Which is, and I've done this before in coaching where, even cold calls, I was like, hey, for, let's say every $10, so $9, you're just practicing a certain pitch. Like you're being mindful, you're reading off the script. And then the $10, you just like throw away the script and just go. So it's like, I've worked that into how people show up, where it's like this hour, we're only going to practice this opener. And then after that, we don't like, it's like, we're just going to do the opener. And then whatever happens after that, we flow. And then there are times when we just show up and just like full embodiment, we perform, like we put on our best performance. So I've actually coached towards that, but it really goes back to like, am I setting out on process? So it's like, I'm always like, if we follow this process, my confidence is in the process. If I follow this process, we will hit our goals. Versus when I said, hey, like we have this 5 million goal this quarter, how confident you're going to do it is like, I don't know.
But high confidence in this process goals that I have, that I know my team will show up and execute to this degree from KPI perspective. I know they'll add 100 people a week into the sequences, and I'm confident in that. And my confidence in the outcome is relative to my confidence in the process goals.
Yeah, totally. There's so much, because then it's at the end of the day, you can show up, have the best goal call and still get told no. Or it's like, I have no control over that. There's so many levels, because then you start to think, I can control the process, I can't control the outcome. If someone tells us no and we get in our feelings, like we had no control over that, but we can control.
As many as you salespeople out there think that you can sell anything, anyone, anytime. The reality is you can't. It shit happens, right? Like we all have our limitations, and to your point, we can't control it because the context is always changing. We have no idea what the other person on the other line is going through, what they're thinking, what's on their plate, right? Thus a cold call. So question for you in transition, I'm going to wrap up here in a moment. So it has to equal 100%. You have two components. You have the two components are talent, individual talent, and the other one is environmental conditions. Put these two together, it has to equal 100%. What percentage do you give to one or the other? Which one is more significant, more necessary to reach our revenue goals, reach success as an organization? Is it individual talent, or is it the environmental conditions? How do you split the percentages?
Right now, I would do 65, 35. Pretty sure it's 100. Environment definitely takes it. And
Okay.
I've shared this with people before. You don't smoke in church.
I mean, did you ever? Not in my lifetime, they didn't.
No matter how
My grandma would have smacked somebody if they all lit up in the church.
And it has nothing to do with whether you're a good person or you're a bad person.
Right.
It's just the environment is so laid out for you that you follow the rules.
The norms,
And that's a
yeah.
success. And so for me is how can I continuously create that environment that like, and the reason, because I've seen it where you've seen it too. You have an amazing rep and he's crushing it. And then you go build a comp plan on this amazing rep. And you're like, wait, why isn't anyone else hitting it? When you realize this rep was just a rock star. And so I'm not saying build it for the average person, but if your environment is set up that like people that can show up and hit it, like people who are above and beyond will go above and beyond. But if this person that hits your core competencies when you're hiring shows up in your process can come hit it, then you've done a great job, right? Versus the other way around, always depending on rock star, like the Mavericks to just come and crush it. Like you don't really have a repeatable process there. You just have.
We can't all be Steph Curry.
Yeah.
Go Dubs.
Hey.
Okay, last question. You shared something with me in our preparation that you're doing to drive revenue and to help your team develop internally. And you have somewhat of a leg up on this because you have access to certain tools and resources. It has to do with artificial intelligence. Talk to the team, or the team, look at audience, already calling you guys my team. Talk to the audience about what you're doing with AI to help your team get to the next level.
Yeah, and I think a lot of companies are doing this. We're fortunate that we do have all our docs. We actually sell to customer success teams. So if you've gone on a website and you said, I need to figure out like how to fix my thing, every company should have an FAQ page. So one of the products that everyone's talking about ChatGPT, and there's like Anthropic, and so one of the things we start to think about, how could this help us with our enablement? And so this whole idea of, I don't know about you, but a lot of people, I've used tons of tools. So we've used Lessonly, we've used all these like LMS. And so, but it's never right in time. And I know you've had other people on this podcast that's like right in time coaching. There's a lot of people that's doing that right now, on top of Gong, on top of Chorus. And so what we're trying to think about is how could we learn more about our customer, but we have all this data. We not only have Gong recordings, but we've also have all our internal docs. We have all the responses.
Scripts, your rebuttals, okay, customer stories.
And so the idea is, how do we not only give the reps real in time, like when they have a question, it's like, hey, what's my pricing? Or this idea of like, what's my connection? Or, hey, like this prospect is asking me thing, he's based here. Do we have a location there? The idea is, can we feed this tool, this AI, this thing, and then have them kind of like surface information to us. So we're taking it a different place of, obviously it's helping people to, a lot of people out there using AI, ChatGPT to write emails. We're trying to use it for more of a enablement piece. And so if you start,
you're ingesting you have an AI LMS platform of your own that you use for your customers, right? So is that what I'm digging at here, and you're ingesting it with all your playbook stuff and all your content for your SDR team, and then through that they can query this model and come up with answers to customer questions and concerns. How far
Yeah,
off
so
are we?
we're also basically training the model on our company. So I think, and I do think
Mhm.
this is one of the things where I think it gets really powerful, because right now it's very general. It's like, hey, write us an email. And I think there's some companies, like if you think about Reggie, like you can tell
Right.
them what your value prop is, and they can like give you an
Yeah, they'll
email.
craft 3 emails the way Script will with Lead IQ, and you have, Lavender is helping,
Yep.
their AI tool too. Yeah.
Yeah. So for us, we're trying to, my big thing was, I need this to be the perfect SDR that knows everything. So imagine
Ah,
an SDR that knows everything, and you can
mm,
ask him the question, all the questions that you could have ever wanted about your prospects, about, your product, everything. So instead of having when someone asks me, I don't know about you, but like I'm searching in Slack, I'm
yeah.
searching in like Google
Give me a
Drive,
second.
searching Notion, like,
Bookmark. Where
yeah.
did I leave that?
So imagine have all of that at your fingertips in just maybe just a Slack box. So that's something that we've been working on. It's been really great internally for our team.
So it's like a
Obviously,
bot, natural language requests, comes back with what you need to know in near real time.
yeah, and there's a couple ways that we're using it. Number one is just like at errands too. You've done it. You roll out a training, and you're like, no, people are afraid to ask questions because it's like, I don't want to look like a fool,
Right,
or
right, right.
they may not ask in the public channel. So it's also like you can just DM them, and you have that private information. The other thing that is like really helpful for us, as I mentioned, did I mention we're hiring? Is onboarding. And so imagine, instead of like all those little questions that you would have had, you'd have to go search everything. It's right at your fingertips now. And so my hope is that I can get a rep up and going in such quick time, because he would have already had all of this as almost his AI helper of like, hey, I'm writing an email to this prospect. What are 2 or 4 value props that we can use?
Man, truly, truly SDR cyborgs. I've been touting this for a little while, but the level of tech sophistication that we're able to get to now with AI, and you have a unique use case. It's not something that's a point solution like the vendors that we mentioned. This is something you've built in-house, which is testament to that, where a magnitude of models are being built everywhere. And I love this idea of like your master or your guru SDR. Probably
Yeah.
it's like, I don't know what your Alexa SDR.
Yeah.
Right? That's really, I mean, you think about it too. You just you train it like you need to do with AI, and yeah, after it's been trained, now it can give you what you need in a jiffy. So no, I love it, and I appreciate you sharing that. I know that's probably somewhat of a insider secret, some secret sauce that you guys are putting together to help you be competitive in your marketplace, but thank you for sharing that. Hopefully that fuels some idea creation for our audience and our listeners. Well, this has been good. I think this has been a phenomenally inspiring conversation, hearing about your background and how you carry that into your management and leadership style. So for those that are listening, environmental conditions, environment, right? So where do you want to send people to check you out, learn more, all that good stuff?
Yeah, I'm just on LinkedIn, Damon McLean. Check me out there. Always interacting with some of the stuff Derek's putting out. I love
Thank
the
you.
sales development community. So that's the best place, or assemble.com. Check out our careers page. We are hiring.
They're hiring, if he didn't mention it before. So you're hiring for SDRs though, specifically?
SDRs, AEs, and some other functions in the product and development side. But yeah, we're definitely
All right.
hiring the sales team.